Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions on health, wellbeing and sport. Question number 1, Dave Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing in the Highlands to ensure that NHS infrastructure is fit for the 21st century.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robson.
We have been in discussions with NHS Highland over the future of facilities in the Murray Firth area, and it was agreed that a master plan was required in order to ensure that the totality of the investment needed in NHS Highland facilities was fully understood. NHS Highland recently presented a master plan to their board which outlines a number of available options which takes into account clinical, public and financial considerations. We will work closely with NHS Highland to ensure that the plan delivers the best outcome possible for the people of NHS Highland.
Thank you, Dave Thompson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer and very much welcome that answer. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that that significant investment which is planned for the next decade in Raigmore in particular, including a potential new build, will not be at the expense of the planned state-of-the-art facilities in Fort William, with the replacement of the Belford, in Badenoch and Strathspey, and also on Skye?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm happy to confirm to Dave Thompson that the state-of-the-art new hospitals in Badenoch and on Skye will not be adversely impacted by the plans for Raigmore Hospital. These existing capital projects will continue as planned, and they will absolutely contribute to an improved infrastructure which will allow NHS Highland to successfully implement the Highland Care Strategy, which outlines their vision for the future delivery of health and social care services for people in the Highlands for the next 10 years. NHS Highland will continue to develop its plans for a future replacement for the Belford Hospital in Fort William as well. In respect of Raigmore, you'll be aware that NHS Highland have identified 5 main options for Raigmore and that they're planning to undertake a full public consultation on these options. We will, of course, consider these plans when they are submitted, but I'm confident that their plans will tie in with their overall strategy as they take this forward.
A supplementary, Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I echo the comments about the Belford? It's certainly been a campaign to have a new Belford in my whole political career in this Parliament, and very little progress has been made to date on that. So I think we don't need to stall that at all. Progress is being made in Badenoch and Skye, but we also need progress in North West Sutherland, where the facilities are not fit for purpose and there needs to be a change. I understand NHS Highland are consulting on that, but it will lead to capital expenditure. Can she assure us that that capital expenditure won't come out of their normal revenue, which has been very tight for a number of years, and that would impact on patient care, that she will make funds available for those capital projects?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I say to Rhoda Grant, I'm pleased that she's pleased that the Belford and the plans for the Belford are moving forward. I think there are some very exciting developments on that front. In terms of North West Sutherland, as I said in my initial answer, obviously NHS Highland have to look at their whole plan in terms of the clinical priorities and, of course, their financial considerations. So what we will do is we will wait for NHS Highland's more detailed plans. They will come forward once they have decided what their priorities are and which options they're going to pursue. As Rhoda Grant said, they're consulting on the proposals for North West Sutherland, and we will await to see what the plans are that they want to take forward, and the capital considerations will be made in the same way as we do with any capital developments within the NHS in Scotland.
Thank you. Question number 2, Murdo Fraser, has not been lodged, and although an explanation was provided, it was unsatisfactory. Question number 3, Alex Johnston.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it is satisfied with the performance of NHS 24 in Grampian.
Cabinet Secretary.
NHS 24 is Scotland's provider of a national telehealth service. There are 4 national contact centres based at Glasgow, Aberdeen, South Queensferry and Clydebank, where trained call handlers take calls from people throughout Scotland. All calls are triaged and directed to the most appropriate healthcare professional within an appropriate timescale based on clinical need. The performance of national organisations, including NHS 24, is managed from a national and non-regional specific basis. NHS 24's unscheduled care service, which is the first point of contact for most people when GP surgeries are closed, dealt with around 1.3 million calls in 2013-14. 95% of these calls were answered within 30 seconds against a target of 90%.
Alec Johnston.
Given that answer, the Minister will, I'm sure, be as horrified as I am to hear of a case of a constituent of mine who assured at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon that if he had any problems over the weekend to phone NHS 24, did so with severe stomach pain or abdominal pains at 7:45 on Saturday morning and again at 11 o'clock, and eventually called an ambulance at 2 o'clock and was seen by a doctor from the associated GMed out-of-hours service at 4 o'clock in Turriff. Can the Minister, in view of this, assure me that the resources and the staffing are available to ensure that this kind of thing is not likely to happen to any more of my constituents?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I say to Alec Johnston, if he's not already done so, he should write to me about the details of that case, and I will certainly investigate it. That is not acceptable, and we need to make sure that NHS 24 provides a rapid response in every case, and I would want to understand the circumstances more fully of why that didn't happen in that case, and I can assure Alec Johnston I'll investigate and get back to him.
Question number 4, Alison McInnes.
To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to improve access to child and adolescent mental health services in the north east of Scotland.
Minister Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you, President Officer. I have spoken to the Chief Executive of NHS Grampian to obtain assurances that the Health Board are doing all they can to achieve the target. As a result of that discussion, I have written to the Board asking for a detailed recovery plan by the 3rd of July. NHS Grampian have done significant work in service redesign to increase their capacity to meet the CAMS target on a sustainable basis. As a result of redesign, NHS Grampian has already identified where they need to increase capacity.
Alison McInnes.
Thank you. My question relates actually to NHS Tayside, where figures show that the longest waiting times have got even worse. In the first 3 months of this year, just 35% of young people started to receive the mental health treatment they desperately needed within that 18-week target. That's down from 52% at the end of last year. Everyone knows that early action is more likely to result in full recovery, and in the case of children and young people, it minimises the impact on other aspects of their development, such as their education. And I actually thought that's why your own department changed the HEAT targets from 26 weeks to 18 weeks at the start of the year. But parents in my region tell me that they're questioning the government's commitment to these targets. ISD statistics show that around 250 young people in Tayside will now have to wait more than a year to start treatment. Will the Minister give reassurance to parents in my region in Tayside? And has he also asked for a detailed recovery plan from NHS Tayside?
Minister.
Let me deal with the latter point first. Yes, I have. I've spoken to a representative of NHS Tayside as well. Let me assure Alison McInnes, all other members in this chamber and everyone's constituents out there, this government is still committed to the targets that we have set. I think a sign of our commitment can be demonstrated through the £15 million we announced for the Mental Health Innovation Fund last year, which is now supplemented by an additional £85 million over 5 years for mental health, which was announced in May of this year. I'm aware of the particular issues in NHS Tayside. It is not the case that the longest waits are getting longer. Part of the challenge in NHS Tayside has been that there has been some particularly long waits, which they are dealing with first, hence the particular challenge with reaching the 18-week target. But let me assure Alison McInnes of this government's determination that that target will be met.
Thank you. Question number 5, Roderick Campbell.
To ask the Scottish Government what progress the NHS has made with the delivery of 7-day services.
Cabinet Secretary.
NHS Scotland already provides high-quality round-the-clock care and operates a range of services across 7 days. However, the Scottish Government is taking forward work to build on this. The Sustainability and 7-Day Services Task Force is considering how best to improve the care our patients receive in the evenings and at weekends and to support a sustainable NHS for the future. The task force published an interim report in March this year outlining a number of specific actions to be taken forward. These include matters such as considering the effectiveness of ward rounds at weekends, considering further opportunities for nurses, AHPs and healthcare scientists to contribute to developing sustainable services, and coordinating further work to support the sustainability of Scotland's 6 rural general hospitals.
Thank you, Roderick Campbell.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Last week, I made a visit to the Marie Curie Hospice in Edinburgh. They advised me that for outpatients, there is no backup available at weekends, and that some terminally ill patients have, therefore, to go for urgent treatment to A&E. They're seeking to reconfigure to more of a 24/7 approach, taking the pressure off A&E. I listened carefully to what the Cabinet Secretary said about the interim report, but when can we expect a further report? And one of the issues raised, I believe, at the Health and Sport Committee on 17th of March was issues in relation to data collection. So anything further would be
Cabinet
helpful.
Secretary.
Well, I can say to Roderick Campbell that the Scottish Government has committed to developing a palliative and end-of-life framework for action supporting high-quality palliative care and end-of-life care by the end of this year. And we'll ensure that we fully reflect that in our work around 7-day services. Just also to say that the 7-day services programme is linked into a range of national activity being taken forward, which is concerned with developing new approaches to and optimising out-of-hours care. You'll be aware, of course, of the out-of-hours primary care review being led by Sir Lewis Ritchie and the unscheduled care programme. We need to make sure that all of that is supporting organisations like Marie Curie and others in their development of 7-day services. We absolutely need to get palliative and end-of-life care right, and I'm determined to do so.
Thank you. John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. While the delivery of a 7-day service is, of course, a laudable aim for the future, can the Cabinet Secretary tell Parliament how NHS Ayrshire and Arran will cope this winter when increased admissions are likely, or even later this month, given that elective surgery is being cancelled in NHS Ayrshire and Arran just now during the summer months due to the number of medical patients being admitted to surgical wards?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I can say to John Scott that we absolutely will make sure that the capacity and resilience is there in all of our boards for winter pressures. But I think what he's hit upon is the need for us to look at new models of care going forward. Obviously, the priority at the moment is focusing on winter and making sure the capacity is there. But as we look beyond that time frame, and the debate later today will touch on some of this, we absolutely need to make sure that we get the models of care right so that we can ensure that there is not a knock-on effect from people coming in through emergency procedures, for example, onto elective capacity, which at the moment happens far too often. So I'm happy to keep John Scott updated about winter resilience, but also the wider debate as we take that forward.
Richard Simpson.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that series of answers? Clearly, the Government are taking the issue of 7-day working seriously. But does she agree with me that, as Roderick Campbell alluded to, we need to have confidence in the data being provided by health boards, which would underpin 7-day working? And would she therefore like to comment on the reports today of the whistleblower in Tayside, who seems to have blown a hole in the A&E target figures in Tayside by reporting more gaming in what had looked to be the best practice in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I answer that in two parts? Firstly, on the data being provided to underpin any work on 7-day services, absolutely as part of the work the task force is taking forward. But I actually think the second issue is a very serious issue and perhaps needs to be dealt with as such. So let me respond to that in detail. Richard Simpson has made a very serious allegation in this chamber, and I want to put a few facts on the record. The system that NHS Tayside has for the A&E department in...
Order, please.
You've made an allegation... Well, OK, you've reported an allegation that has been made, so let me deal with the allegation.
Cabinet Secretary, it's somewhat wide of the initial question anyway, so
yeah, but
perhaps it could be dealt with in some other way. I'm calling Nanette Millen for a supplementary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Has the Government made any assessment of how many more staff would need to be recruited and at what cost were the NHS to move generally to a 7-day service?
Cabinet Secretary.
That is part of the work ongoing on 7-day services. It's very important that the workforce requirements to sustain 7-day working are looked at. Obviously, some staff already work across 7 days. That's a bit more challenging when it comes to medical staff and their contracts. So what I want to assure what the workforce, whatever part of the workforce they are, is that this will be done in consultation and in partnership, which is the way that we do things in the NHS, and nothing will be imposed upon anyone. What is important, though, is that as we look towards models of care in the future, that there is a requirement for us to look at new ways of working. 7-day working is important, but that, as I've said before in this chamber, that's not about doing complex operations at 4 o'clock in the morning because we can. It's not about that. It's about making sure that the core services are sustainable and sustained, and, for example, that we're able to do more discharge at the weekends so that we're not having that blockage on a Monday and Tuesday within our acute hospitals. So very happy to keep Nanette Milne posted on that.
Question number 6, Elaine Murray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what consideration can be given to individual patient treatment requests for further or repeat courses when the initial treatment has had some success.
Cabinet Secretary.
We expect NHS boards to have procedures in place to deal with a wide variety of individual patient treatment requests for both medicines and other therapeutic interventions. Decisions on individual treatment are a matter for discussion between the individual and their consultant.
Elaine Murray.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her reply, and I'm asking this question on behalf of my constituent Brian Houliston. Brian and his wife Shona are in the gallery this afternoon. Brian is suffering from esophageal cancer and had to fight to receive a treatment available on the NHS in England, which has successfully shrunk the tumour and restored his health. He has now been refused funding for the second part of his treatment and will have to raise something in the region of £26,000 for follow-up treatment privately. Can the Cabinet Secretary please advise what can be done to ensure that Mr Houliston receives his treatment on the NHS, which would prolong his life and provide evidence of possible treatment for other patients suffering from this cancer?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm obviously very conscious that Elaine Murray's constituent is in the gallery, and I would be very happy to follow up with her some of the detail around the case, because obviously there's a limit to how much we can discuss individual cases within this chamber. However, I'm assuming that she might be talking about selective internal radiation therapy. Now, what's important to note is that the selective internal radiation therapy treatment is not routinely provided in the UK. However, a UK-wide clinical evaluation is currently underway to assess the effectiveness of this type of therapy for a small number of patients. We would normally say that if a person wishes to access CERT therapy, then they should discuss this with the team responsible for their care in the first instance to identify whether their specialist doctor considers that they would benefit from this new treatment. And we would expect boards to have in place processes to allow patients who are recommended by their specialist to potentially benefit from that treatment to be considered for this therapy. But clearly, I think the best way to follow this up would be if Elaine Murray wants to email me or write to me with the particular circumstances of the case. I can get more detail back to her on that.
Thank you. Question number 7, Alex Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will reconsider its decision to discontinue core funding for the Neurological Alliance of Scotland.
Minister Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government remains fully committed to working with all stakeholders to improve outcomes for people with neurological conditions. We will continue to work with the third sector colleagues and indeed will be refocusing effort in this area. To that end, we expect to increase funding for specific projects to improve services and experience for people with neurological conditions. This year we expect to invest almost 3 times as much funding as last year, up to £210,000 to support robust improvement projects. And through the Chief Scientist Office, we have currently committed over £2 million on projects relating to neurological conditions. In addition, £700,000 has been committed to funding motor neuron disease specialist nurses.
Alex Ferguson.
I thank the Minister for that response, which I'll take as a no to my question. I have looked carefully at Monday's written response from him to the parliamentary question lodged by my colleague Nanette Milne on this very subject. But the Scottish Government has turned down the Alliance's request for just £35,000 of core funding, funding which enables the neurological charities to work together to move neurology up both the political and the NHS agenda, something I think most people believe it has done very successfully. But how does the Scottish Government's rejection of that request accord with the Cabinet Secretary's amendment to this afternoon's debate on health, which talks of fostering a mature debate and developing a consensual approach to future challenges?
Minister.
Well, in the interest of fostering a mature debate, let me answer that question. Let me say, first of all, it's not the case that funding has been discontinued as such. There was an agreed funding period which came to an end. I should say to Alec Ferguson, I'll be meeting the chair of the Neurological Alliance soon, where I'll be very happy to discuss this matter with him. It is, of course, already the case that the Scottish Government funds the Health and Social Care Alliance to excess of £3 million per year. This group has a variety of strategic outcomes. It has strong experience and expertise in topics such as health and social care integration, a key concern for the neurological community. A number, in fact a majority of the member organisations of the Neurological Alliance of Scotland are also members of the Alliance. I believe the Alliance is well placed to provide a strong voice for the neurological community. We also, of course, fund the National Neurological Advisory Group, and indeed the project funding, the threefold increase in project funding, which I notice was not welcomed by Alec Ferguson, will be, of course, the case that Neurological Alliance may be able to apply and benefit by that.
Thank you. Question number 8, Mark Griffin, has not been lodged, and again the explanation was not satisfactory. Question number 9, Gavin Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met NHS Lothian.
Cabinet Secretary.
Ministers and government officials regularly meet with representatives of NHS Lothian to discuss matters of importance to local people.
Gavin Brown.
For that answer, did they discuss sickness absence in the last meeting? And if so, what is the Government's explanation for NHS Lothian seeing an increase in sickness absence in each of the last 3 years?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, sickness absence will be a regular item for discussion with NHS Lothian, with officials. And sickness absence, of course, forms part of the annual review process in looking at progress being made on that. What I can say to Gavin Brown is that we absolutely want to tackle sickness absence, but of course that's against a background of us making sure that there are more staff than ever within our NHS, which I'm sure is something that Gavin Brown will welcome. I'm certainly able to tell him that the number of full-time equivalent staff employed within the board has increased substantially from September 2006 to March 2015 by 10.7%. And of course that includes a 34% increase in medical and dental consultant numbers and a 12.6% increase in qualified nurses and midwives. It might not be something Richard Simpson wants to hear about because he likes to talk about doom and gloom, but I'm sure for the people of NHS Lothian that will be welcome news indeed.
Jim Eadie.
Presiding Officer, is the Cabinet Secretary aware of the concerns of the National Osteoporosis Society and clinicians involved in the management of osteoporosis and the prevention of fragility fractures that the waiting time guarantee for a DEXA scan in NHS Lothian is not being met, meaning that some patients are having to wait 15 months from fracture to treatment and are at risk of fracturing again during the time that they have to wait? Will the Cabinet Secretary give a commitment to raise this matter directly with NHS Lothian to ensure that any specific issues can be addressed and that patients receive the care to which they are entitled?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would certainly share the Society's concern that any patient should have an excessive wait for a DEXA scan, and that wouldn't be acceptable. Whilst a DEXA scan is not one of the 8 key diagnostic tests covered by the 6-week waiting time standard, the Scottish Government does expect that all boards ensure that waits for other diagnostic tests are kept as short as possible and, if possible, should be carried out within 6 weeks. We're aware that NHS Lothian's current wait for a DEXA scan is well in excess of 6 weeks, and we've made it clear to the board that they must take immediate action to significantly reduce this wait as quickly as possible, and my officials will be monitoring the board's progress over the next few months very closely.
If you are brief, Sarah Boyack.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Has the Cabinet Secretary spoken to NHS Lothian about the problem of GP practices? I understand that there are now 26 GP practices have closed their doors. And is she prepared to say when the GP fund, the £50 million fund, will be made available to Lothian to bid into?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the detail of the fund that Sarah Boyack refers to will be made available very soon indeed. But of course, the fund is being used with under the negotiation with the Royal College of GPs and the BMA and others, on a strategic basis to try and help with some of the immediate recruitment and retention issues and workforce pressures that have been raised by those organisations and indeed others. I am aware of the issues that Sarah Boyatt raises within Lothian. Part of the reason that there has been quite a short-term number of GPs who are taking earlier retirement than they had planned was because of some of the pension changes that have been made. That has accelerated some of the plans that GPs had around their retirement plans, which is unfortunate, but that is a fact. The boards obviously are in discussion with those GP practices about how they can make sure there's continuity of patient care while further medium to longer term plans are put in place. But I'm certainly happy to speak to Sarah Boyack in more detail about those issues that she's raised.
Question number 10, John Mason.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it considers that resources for GP practices should be moved from richer areas to poorer areas.
Cabinet Secretary.
This Government is committed to investing in all of general practice. The Scottish allocation formula for allocating the global sum practice funding accounts for around half of practices' current funding and fees. The formula is on the basis of the relative need and workload of their patients, taking into consideration the relative costs of service delivery. The Scottish allocation formula includes a weighting to account for the socio-economic status of the GP practice population. By including this weighting, the formula acknowledges that people from deprived backgrounds typically have poorer health outcomes, higher morbidity and greater health needs. I'm sure the member will be aware we're undertaking a review of the GMS contract in Scotland and at the same time reviewing the financial framework that funds general practice in order to put in place a sustainable and stable methods of funding general practice for the future.
John Mason.
Well, I'm grateful that the system is being reviewed, because it does seem to me, and I wonder if she would agree, that if life expectancy falls so dramatically from the west end of Glasgow to the east end of Glasgow, then it may be that the present funding resources are not ideal.
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I say to John Mason that I understand that the member, as a member, he represents constituents from among the most deprived areas of Glasgow, and we know that there are many factors which cause the health inequalities which we need to tackle across government. It's not just for the NHS to tackle, and it can't be resolved within general practice alone. However, I'm very keen, as we take forward the discussion about new models of care for primary care, that we look at the opportunities to get this right and to put tackling health inequalities at the centre of those discussions as we go forward, because I think we can do more within primary care to tackle health inequalities.
Thank you. Question number 11, Mary Scanlon.
Government whether it will provide an update on the review of provision of NHS services on the Isle of Skye.
Cabinet Secretary.
NHS Highland undertook formal public consultation between May and August last year on their proposals to modernise community and hospital services in Skye, Loch Alsh and South West Ross. The proposals to build a new hospital in Broadford alongside the development of Portree Community Hospital were endorsed by the Board of NHS Highland last December. As the proposals were considered major service change, they were subsequently submitted to the Government. I carefully considered all the available evidence and representations and approved the proposals in February. I've been very clear with NHS Highland that they must continue to fully involve all local stakeholders as the plans are developed and this important work is taken forward.
Mary Scanlon.
Thank you. In Highlands, we want a centre of excellence in Raigmore Hospital in Inverness, but we also want appropriate NHS services throughout the region. So given the £6 million overspend at Raigmore Hospital this year, can the Cabinet Secretary give an assurance to people across the Highlands, particularly on the Isle of Skye, that local, accessible NHS services will not be cut and that local voices and concerns will continue to be heard, but heard with respect?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I absolutely agree that local voices should be heard and should be heard with respect. I absolutely agree with that. Of course, the board had a difficult decision to make, and I'm sure that if they had made a different decision, then other voices would have been raised who were not happy with that decision. So they made the decision based on what they thought was the best available evidence and have taken that forward and continue to engage with local people around that process. I think it's also important to say that the Independent Scottish Health Council did confirm that the board's public engagement process had been consistent with national guidance. So the decision is made, they are getting on with the work in hand, but they will continue to discuss with local people about further enhancements that can be made across the Isle of Skye and beyond.
Question number 12, Mike Mackenzie.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of how telehealth could assist in the delivery of healthcare across the Highlands and Islands.
Minister Maureen Watt.
The Scottish Government has set out the policy direction and strategic priorities to support expansion of telehealth and telecare in Scotland in the National Telehealth and Telecare Delivery Plan, which was launched in early 2013. This work is supported by the £30 million Technology-Enabled Care, or TEC programme from April 2015 for 3 years to support local developments. It's the role of Health Board, local authorities and new joint integration bodies to assess and commission appropriate services to address local needs, and this is being facilitated by the National Improvement Programme for TEC, Delivering Our Ambitions, launched in September 2014. Highlands and Islands are active partners in this work and have also received specific tech funding of £407,000 for 15-16 to expand expertise and provision across their local areas.
Mike Mackenzie.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Does she agree with me that these opportunities are severely limited by very poor mobile connectivity? And will she join me in calling for the UK Government to urgently address the very poor 2G, 3G and 4G availability across the Highlands and Islands?
Maureen Watt.
Of course, mobile connectivity is an integral part of the Scottish Government's world-class digital ambitions and of particular importance to rural communities. Many of the coverage issues we experience in Scotland, particularly 3G, stem from the UK Government's flawed approach to auctioning spectrum, which allowed operators to focus solely on urban areas at the expense of rural communities. Ensuring that the same mistakes aren't repeated with 4G rollout is a key priority for the Scottish Government, and we continue to press the UK Government on digital connectivity issues. Indeed, the Deputy First Minister met John Whittingdale, Secretary of State, Culture, Media and Sport, earlier this week to discuss this issue. The Scottish Government is keen to test new models that could extend coverage to areas seen as non-commercial by mobile operators. And we recently funded a community-owned mobile mast on the island of Coll, which I'm sure the member knows about, a partnership with Development Coll and Vodafone that has brought 3G and 4G services to the island, the first island in Scotland to receive 4G.
Thank you. If we have slightly shorter questions and more succinct answers, I might be able to make a bit more progress. Question number 13, John Wilson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when officials last met at the board of NHS Lanarkshire.
Shona Robson.
Ministers and government officials regularly meet with representatives of all health boards, including NHS Lanarkshire.
John Wilson.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for her response. Much progress has been made in the North Lanarkshire area of Lanarkshire Health Board in recent years with new multidisciplinary health facilities in Coatbridge, Airdrie and Kilsyth. Could the Cabinet Secretary indicate whether there has been any discussions with the NHS Lanarkshire regarding a proposal to build a new multidisciplinary health facility in the Northern Corridor area in North Lanarkshire in Christon, particularly given that many of the residents in that area are actually receiving health services from two health boards, Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Board and Lanarkshire Health Board. And having one health facility in that area may resolve some of the issues that are being caused by the delivery of these services.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the planning of local services is obviously down to NHS Lanarkshire and indeed in consultation with the neighbouring boards. They've certainly not brought any proposals to us around a new facility for Christland, but I'm certainly happy to write to the member and to find out from NHS Lanarkshire about whether that is something that they have within their plans for the future. And I'll write to John Wilson with that once I get that information.
Question number 14, Claire Baker.
To ask the Scottish Government when it last met NHS Fife and what issues were discussed.
Cabinet Secretary.
Ministers and government officials regularly meet with representatives of NHS Fife to discuss matters of importance to local people.
Claire Baker.
Presiding Officer, I've been contacted by constituents who recently lost their young grandson in tragic circumstances. They have raised concerns with me around the process of identifying the body and the mortuary facilities in Fife. I am currently in communication with Fife NHS about these issues, but can the Cabinet Secretary confirm whether or not there is a consistency across all health boards and mortuary facilities, and if there is guidance on minimum standards which health boards are expected to meet?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I say to Claire Baker that I think it might be helpful if she was to write to either myself or to Maureen Watt, Public Health Minister, with more of the details of the concerns that have been raised around the mortuary facilities. Meanwhile, we will provide her with information about standards that she asked for, but I think it would be helpful, given the circumstances of the case she has highlighted, if we had more detail on that and what the nature of those concerns were, and we'll make sure that she gets a reply to that.
Question number 15, Nanette Milne.
To ask the Scottish Government what it's doing to support the estimated 850,000 people in Scotland who are deaf or have a hearing loss.
Minister Jamie Hepburn.
The Scottish Government believes that adults and children with a sensory impairment should expect seamless provision of assessment, care and support and the same access to employment, education, leisure, healthcare and social care as everyone else. Sensory impairment includes varying degrees of hearing loss, sight loss and dual sensory impairment. For this reason, we've invested £2 million to drive improvement via our sensory impairment strategy, see here, launched in April 2014, the first of its kind in the UK. It sets a course towards the step change needed to make Scotland a more inclusive place for people with sensory loss.
Nanette Milne.
Thank the Minister for the answer. When an individual requires a hearing aid, it's important that they receive this as soon as possible to support them to continue living independently and reduce their risk of experiencing isolation. Picture across Scotland is very mixed when it comes to accessing specialist hearing services, something which could be addressed by establishing local audiology teams. What assurance can the Minister give that a postcode lottery is not developing in Scotland, and what engagement has the Scottish Government had with the third sector, which already delivers significant community-based basic maintenance and support?
Minister.
This Government engages regularly with the third sector on a range of topics. I can assure the member that this is an area that we do have dialogue. I recently met Action Hearing Loss, for example, to discuss some of these issues. That dialogue will continually maintain, and where we have any targets in any part of the National Health Service, we expect those targets to be met.
Thank you. Question number 16, Gil Patterson.
Many thanks, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding the impact of the proposed Scotland Bill on NHS funding.
Cabinet Secretary.
Negotiation of a new fiscal framework for Scotland is one of the highest priorities of the Scottish Government in the months ahead, and the Deputy First Minister met with the Chancellor of the Exchequer on Monday to take forward these discussions. We will seek to agree a new fiscal framework that reflects the needs and interests of the people of Scotland, and our commitment to protecting the NHS remains unchanged.
Gil Patterson.
And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. Does the Cabinet Secretary share my concerns about the Chancellor's latest announcement of further cuts, including cuts to public health, at a time when we need to do everything we can to protect the health service in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I certainly join Gil Patterson in expressing my concern that the Chancellor seems intent on additional cuts, including £200 million from this year's health funding in England that goes towards public health. And this Government will work to mitigate the impact on our budgets and to provide further reassurance on this Government's commitment to the NHS. Since 2010-11, Westminster has cut Scotland's fiscal resource budget by 9% in real terms, but we've increased the health resource budget by 5% in real terms over the same period. And this year, of course, we've taken the total health spending to over £12 billion for the first time ever. But I will keep Gil Patterson informed about how we will mitigate against the cuts to public health.
Question number 17, Alec Rowley.
To ask the Scottish Government how many unfilled consultant posts there are in NHS 5.
Cabinet Secretary.
Under this government, the number of consultants in post in NHS 5 is at a record high, having increased by 64.2 whole-time equivalent from 168.2 in September 2006 to 232.3 in March 2015. Out of an establishment of 281.9 whole-time equivalent consultant posts in NHS 5, 52.6 whole-time equivalent are currently vacant. The position in Fife reflects the fact that we currently have some of the highest staffing levels ever across our NHS, with record numbers of consultants. The increase in vacancies is linked to these efforts to increase capacity by recruiting even more staff, and we acknowledge the efforts being made by all boards, including NHS 5, to fill any vacancies in whatever way they can.
A brief supplementary and a brief answer, please, Alec Rowley.
Secretary for that answer, and I do recognise that progress has been made and the hard work that's going on, but nevertheless this still is an unacceptable situation, and given how difficult it is to recruit consultants into the more rural areas, what proposals and plans is she looking at for a long-term solution to this issue?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I say to Alec Rowley, I'm glad you welcomed the progress made, and I also welcome the tone of his question. I think he hits upon an issue that we have to look at how we help our hospitals, our district generals and our rural general hospitals that can find it more difficult to recruit to certain specialities. The teaching hospitals have less of an issue here, and I think we have to look at imaginative solutions. For example, perhaps people being recruited to work across networks, including spending some of their time in a teaching hospital, but perhaps some of the rest of their time in one of the district generals or rural general hospitals. Some of that has already happened, but it's quite small scale, and I think we have to look at more imaginative and innovative ways, and I'm happy to keep Alex Rowley posted on that progress.
Many thanks. That concludes questions this afternoon, and we turn to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion number 13416 in the name of